He is Department Head Package Unit Equipment, Linde Engineering, Vadodara. He has completed his B Mechanical with first class in September 1992 from Government SS Government Engineering College, Bhavnagar, affiliated to Bhavnagar University. He has also obtained Boiler Proficiency Engineer Certificate in year 2003. The exam is conducted by IBR India. He is having more than 28 years of experience. He is having multifunctional experience in field, basic and detailed engineering, commissioning, operation and troubleshooting of process and utility package units. He has worked in various industries like petrochemical, pharmaceutical, oil refineries, like Reliance Refineries, as well as in EPC companies like SR Projects, Linde Engineering. Linde Engineering is a group company. Linde PLC, world's leading supplier and licensor of industrial process and specialty gases, and renowned EPC group with nearly 75,000 employees across the globe, having annual group turnover of more than $27 billion. Vipin Balodia sir has experience with different organizations like Petrophils Cooperatives, Torrent Biotech Vadodara, Reliance Industries Jamnagar, SR Projects Jamnagar, Linde Engineering Vadodara, where he is serving since June 2011. He has traveled abroad also. He visited UOP at Chicago, USA. He also visited Kenya for one refinery project at Kenya. Also, he visited Linde headquarters at Germany. He is a very versatile person having very good exposure in different technical fields. Welcome, sir, for today's session. Today's session is on overview of utility package units.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Shah. Thanks for the brief introduction. And before we start, let me also take this opportunity to pay my gratitude to the Department of Mechanical Engineering of Government Engineering College, Dahod, and especially DR Shah, who connected me and requested to take part in this initiative. And I am really glad to be here in front of you. Okay, so I think we are still 3-4 minutes ahead of the time. So, dear Sai, you can just suggest me when we can start.
Sir, you can give brief introduction about your company right now, and then after at 10 o'clock you can start your presentation.
Okay. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. So before, let's say, I start introduction, I would like to share the screen so that at least we all on the same page. Dear, you can just guide me if you are able to see the screen.
Visible.
Yes, sir, screen is visible.
Okay, it is in full PowerPoint presentation mode.
No, sir, it is not in Power Present mode.
Okay, just a moment.
Okay, ready, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. So, in fact, first of all, I apologize because I have 3 different screens. So, if I am keeping my video on, I have to, my camera is on this side and my presentation is on that side. So, I apologize. I will keep my camera off, so don't to distract everyone. And we will start the presentation. And before that, I would like to give some ground rules. Ground rules are this presentation covers approximately 1 hour and 50 minutes, and I will keep a dedicated session of 15 minutes for question and answer at last. Nevertheless, you can ask question any point of time whenever you feel. Second thing, since it is a more than 2 hours, so it's a human psychology. Anything more than 1 hour is difficult to digest in our mind. So I suggest a bio break of 5 to 10 minutes. I mean, subject to how it allowed by the college or university. Okay, but I personally prefer after 1 hour we should have a 5 minute or 7 minutes bio break just to get relaxed. I think it is fine, right?
No problem, sir. You can continue.
Okay, fine. So let me give a short overview about Linde Engineering India. So some of you people might be knowing that Linde is a licensor company and also an EPC company. The difference between EPC and licensor company is licensor gives a process license, process guarantee for a identified period of time, 20 years, 25 years. And the moment those Linde supplied plant, they run beyond the guarantee, let's say 20 years or 25 years, then we as a company get loyalty from the respective customers. And today I'm proud to say that just whatever loyalty we earn across the globe, that is more than enough to pay the salary of 75,000 people. So this is how Linde has a big name. This company was established by Dr. Carl von Linde. So basically, initially it was a family-oriented small company, and this is how it has emerged out as a very large and significant group. And today, in terms of air separation plant, we are number one in the world, especially for this product only. Other than air separation, that means oxygen, nitrogen, we are also pioneer basically in hydrogen, ammonia, our own mid to small size LNG plants and ethylene crackers. So these are the variety of industrial gases or specialty gases where customer approach us, and many a time they just approach, we have a land of this by this plot area and we want to establish ethylene cracker. We have a gas feed available, we have down the stream, all the plants are available, but we want to crack it down ethylene and complete ethylene plant we want to put up. So this is how Linde builds a complete from concept to commissioning a detailed solution. And here in the mechanical department, we handle equipment, variety of equipment, static equipment like pressure vessels, heat exchangers, package units like utility processes, utility and process package units. That covers many, many more. We will see in the presentation ahead. Apart from these, we have a rotating machinery department, and they are most prominently looking after the compressors and pumps. So this is how mechanical division here at Linde Engineering India is divided into. So without wasting much time, let us jump into the presentation part. So we will have an agenda today. Of course, as a course of content, I am supposed to deliver on initial 3 topics, but I would like to take this opportunity also to give some glimpse on EPC workflow, that is engineering, procurement and construction. So typically how a project management of this package unit happens at the different stages, like what we are doing in conceptualization or a basic engineering phase, what is the detail engineering of package unit, and what it comes when it reach to the end, the commissioning of the package unit. And of course, once it is commissioned, it is handed over to customer or a client and they operate it. So then it comes operation and maintenance. And at the last, we will see some, typical EPC execution challenges, not only to the Linde, but in a global market, whosoever is in this business, they might be facing as a, execution challenges. So with this, let us move ahead on our topic. And let me tell you, I don't want to just bombard things from me over to you. Since you are a university student, many of you are university students, they are either pursuing, they have already pursued. So I will be definitely asking some questions because I know you are a fresh graduates. you might be knowing some of the terminology much more than me. So I will be also at this experience also learner for that matter, and I will be asking some of the questions. Okay, so before I
Sir,
start, yes,
sir, just a minute. All are faculties from different engineering colleges across India. Not
okay,
students, in
nice.
fact, all are faculty members.
Oh, such a nice.
Yeah.
That's great. So never mind it because all are from mechanical. I believe most of them are from mechanical. Fine. So my first question to the audience: anybody would like to share a one line, one word, or anything about what you know about the package unit, the word package, what it appears to you in your mind? So any few questions.
Generally, sir, packaging is used in the industry to provide the product in its original form to the construction. So during transportation, the same will not get deteriorated, detracted while traveling for the industry to the dealer, dealer to the sub-dealer, and sub-dealer to the customer. So it is very important part of the sales as well as the marketing.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jani. You have touched the right terminology and few of the aspect also of the package unit definition. So let us understand. Basically, package unit is a set of equipment. Yeah, it can have a more than one equipment. Equipment can be of static orientation, rotating, or electrical or instrumentation. And by and large, they are connected with the piping and or cable network mounted on a skid. So definitely skid is a frame or a structure or a pre-assembled to the largest extent, because our ultimate aim is to transport, to move from one place to another place, and that's why it should be pre-assembled to the possible extent, and most of the time it is back up with the instrumentation to obtain the automation. So this is how a package unit, you can say in a nutshell. So definitely why we are doing all these things. So just before that you can see a small picture. This is nothing but a small skid-based package unit. It's a chemical dosing unit where you can see some tank cages, some pumps, and local panel. Okay, so why we need package unit in industries? Okay, certain function cannot be performed by a single equipment, and that's why we are clubbing all this equipment together to obtain a certain function. Reduction in time delay for certain set of actions, that is a programmable logic control based package unit, because sometime in spite of having a lot of automation from the DCS control room, you cannot achieve the target operation within the microsecond. So whenever you need certain operation must be happen within the stipulated time in a microsecond, then you need to have a local operation or a PLC based package unit. It supports, of course, local operation of certain auxiliary processes from the field, because that has a versatility. Everything cannot be operated from remote. So sometimes you need to have a local functionality also. Ease in fabrication and transportation, as rightly said by Dr. Jani. It constrains area availability at site, because in a typical construction site you don't have that many places. Think about if all those equipment are not stuffed on a skid, and if those are placed locally side by side, then also it require a lot of space. So basically wherever there is a space constraint, it helps to narrow down the space requirement. It assists in continuous operation of the main process plant, because ultimately the package unit is to support the main process. We should not forget why we are installing, because our overall objective is to operate the plant, whether it is a hydrogen plant, ethylene cracker, LNG, or any kind of a gas or a chemical plant. So what are the basic types of package units? So broadly you can say two category. One is a utility category, so day-to-day use, and another is a special category or a process package unit. So what are the utility? So that means package boiler, compressor system or instrument dryer, nitrogen generation unit, water treatment, that can be raw water, wastewater, cooling towers, refrigeration or a chilled water system, demineralization plant, condensate polishing, thermal desalinations, and reverse osmosis. So these are some basic utilities which is needed in terms of day-to-day plant operation. And there are a couple of process units which are specialized and may not be available in all kind of industries, but depending on nature of industries, like a process gas dryer. So instead of air, here you will find some gas drying. Waste heat recovery boilers, because before eliminating a lot of waste through the stack, we need to recover, we can recover it for the industrial use, and this is how waste heat recovery boilers comes into picture. Flare for the destruction of gases before it liberates into the atmosphere. Incinerator to kill liquid, solid, or gaseous impurities, destruct it before we put into the stack as a flue gas. Chemical dosing unit, spent caustic treatment unit, material handling system, clean agent system, foam pourer system, deluge system, loading and unloading arms, and fire heaters. So these are a couple of package units. And of course, with a constraint of 2 hours, we cannot touch each and every one. So what we are going to do, in initial session of the presentation, I will be giving us some glimpse at a glance, how it looks like, what is the functionality in the industries, and what is the schematic or a working principle. That's it. And few of the packages we will look into much depth as a case study. So that will give you a good idea what exactly happened inside the package. Dear, I request, can you please put your mic in mute? Whenever needed, I will announce, and that time you can unmute it. Thank you. So let us look at some packages at a glance. Boiler package. So you might have learned a lot of theory, a lot of things. So here you can see a real view of industries, how this boiler looks like. It is a complete set of a horizontal equipment. Center portion is a furnace. Here you can see a fan and burner block mounted together, which has some automation, local panel, like in a IBR or a boiler definition, you might be knowing that what are the mountings and accessories: steam stop valve, level monitoring or level gauge glass, yeah, pressure gauge, steam safety valves, Mowbray, and many more things. So let us look at a detailed view where you can understand what exactly is happening inside it. So center portion is a furnace. So burner is firing it. So heat is transferred through the furnace wall to the surrounding where water is filled up on the external part of the tubes. In the tubes, all the flue gases are travel in a 2 or 3 pass. Here it is the first path is furnace. On the back side, refractory lid and door is there. So to conserve the heat, it goes to second pass, and again it comes out as a third pass, and you have exhaust stacks somewhere mounted here. So this is a cut or educational view. In industrial view, you can see it is always connected with the stack. And these all are things what as a mounting and accessory is needed to successfully run the boiler operation. And at the bottom, you can see a blowdown valve, because wherever some heating is happening, accumulation of solid will be always there. And to maintain a good quality of water, we have to always blow down some solids from the bottom so that water inside the steam production area remains intact. Fine, let's move to another piece of equipment, that's a fired heater. This is an industrial view, especially Linde has built this unit in Opal, Dahej. This is a fire heater. So how fire heater and what is the significance of it? So wherever you have a hydrocarbon fluid and you need some heating, some 100-degree or 150-degree heating is needed. So of course, heat exchanger may not be able to give that much delta T. So in that case, the equipment called fire heater, many a time, most of the time it is a vertical installation. Of course, on a special case, you can see horizontal installation also. So fire heater is, you can say, a modified version of the boiler, where you can also see air fan, burners at the bottom. So stoichiometric mixture is introduced here to produce the fire, and first zone where temperature is the highest one, so that's a radiation zone, and maximum heat is recovered here. And second zone is a convection zone, and there is some shielding section. So shielding section is nothing but it also gets some radiation heat as well as heat from the secondary heat in the convection zone. So basically high temperature fluid goes inside, first enter into the convection zone, and then via radiation zone it comes out as a desired delta T temperatures, and typically in range of 150 to sometime even as high as 300 degree. And once the heating is done, so residual gases is vented off from the stack, and damper is there to control the air fuel ratio. And of course, everything would be automated in a larger footprint. This is just a schematic view. Similar one piece of equipment is a incinerator. So incineration word itself tell basically we have to incinerate something. We have to kill something before we release it into the atmosphere. So this is nothing but an incinerator. So let me show you a graphical view. So here also you will find air and fuel in the burner, and the specialty thing is a tail gas or a waste gas that comes into the chamber. So burner is designed to destruct, to take care of complete destruction of the waste gases, which is being comes as a waste gas from the plant. We need to destruct it completely. So whenever you are making any destruction and you have a burner, so a lot of flue gases will be generated, and you have achieved your target of destruction. But again, you know, it has a value of high temperature gases, so we cannot liberate into the stack. So before we liberate it, typically in industries, we mount waste heat recovery boiler. Okay, so waste heat recovery boiler basically recovers all this heat. So boiler feed water goes in and steam produced based on the different level, low pressure steam or a medium pressure steam, and sometime depending on the nature of flue gas availability, you can also produce high pressure steam. And once it is done, so typically in the range of 150 to 250 degrees centigrade temperature, then it is safe to liberate into the stack. And because of height effect, chimney effect, the temperature will reduce further around 10 to 20 degrees. And since it is at elevated location, and once a dispersion takes place and it comes back to the ground, you will see that temperature is drastically reduced. Right, so this is how incinerator works. Now coming to the flare. So basically flare is also a similar version, and objective is to destruct the waste gases, but here working principle is a little bit different, because you know in all our industries, chemical or a petrochemical plant, you can find number of safety valves. So those safety valves are nothing but safeguarding devices. So whenever, because of virtue of operation, whenever there is a high pressure or a high temperature, so pressure safety valve will popped up, and all the liberated gases comes to a common header, and that liberated gases is a hydrocarbon. We cannot leave into the atmosphere. So that comes to a liquid knockout drum. Sometime it is a two-phase flow, some liquid droplets also carrying out along with the safety valve. So we need to separate out both the phases, gas and liquid phase. So again, liquid phase goes back to the system, and gaseous stream we have to fed into the flare stack. So before we fetch into the flare stack, there is a water seal, because you know anything happens, there should not be any burn back coming back to the flash seal drum and travel back into the industries where hydrocarbon is easily available and it can create fire. So you will always find a water seal device. So that is nothing but all the gases is going via liquid, and then only gases will goes to the stack. And similarly, another safety device you will find on the stack, that is a flashback prevention section. That is nothing but a flashback seal. So whenever there is a firing back because of improper stoichiometry, in that case it won't comes back and it will be prevented over here. So this is what kind of arrangement is available. Apart from these, on the top you will find always some burners or a pilot burners, you can say. Air and fuel from the grid is fed up to the top level, and you will find a spark plug which is not shown in the picture. So spark plug ignites the firing, and it is just like a your domestic gas burner. So you have to continuously keep it on. So as and when any PSV pops up and gas liberates, it should be immediately burned out. So this is the working principle. And in many typical industries, you might be seeing that long or a very high elevated stack and continuous something is burning. So that is nothing but a flare. Yeah, so this is a real picture. You might have seen in many industries how flaring is happening. Okay, now you have seen it is a very elevated stack or a very height is too much. So what to do in that case? Yeah. So to support that, you need to have a structure that is called derrick structure. So derrick structure is always mounted to take care about wind or a seismic effect, and stack should be intact in both the conditions. Usually, when flare height is up to 45 meter, self-supported stack is always a preferred solution. And when you have more than 45, then you have a two choice. Either you can go with the derrick structure, it is a dense structure around the stack, or you have a guy wired supports. So guy wired is a some 3 or 4 point contact, and you tie up with some anchors at the ground. But here, because of this diametrical limitation, everywhere the space is not available. So we have to strike the balance between these two choices, derrick versus guide wire. And of course, this has a lot of steel structure, so it's a costly one, and guide wire is comparatively economical one. Let's move to the wastewater treatment plant. This is a very tricky, and each and every unit has a micro level objective and function. So we'll not go into much functionality detail because we have planned some other packages to go into depth. So I will just give you a glance what it consists of. So basically any wastewater or effluent treatment plant or ATP is consisting of three sections. You can say one arbitrary section is like this. So this is the oil removal section, first section, and then mid section is a bio treatment, where biological or a microbiological culture is interacting with the water, and all the organic impurities is being eaten away by the bacteria. So this is why it is called biological treatment. And last treatment phase on the third row, this is nothing but a clarification process or a filtration process. So any industrial waste from the process unit, which has a oil plus water plus some chemical, that comes to a pre-deoiler unit. This is designed by American Petroleum Institute, so it's many a time known as API unit. Then tilted plate interceptor. So these two units basically remove free oil, and then you have also some emulsified oil which cannot be easily separated through a mechanical process. So in that case, you have to inject some dewatering chemical like ferric chloride or some polymer based on dewatering nature. Once you do that, and also some pH correction because it works at certain pH only. So caustic and acid basically do the neutralization of effluent. And in the DF unit, dissolved air flotation, so we usually put a compressor inside it. So when you put the compressor at the bottom, all the emulsified oil that along with the air bubble, it will form a small film surrounding the bubbles, and it will come to the surface. And there are some surface skimmers, so that will be removing oil from the surface. So this is how additional oil can be removed from here. So typically up to 10 ppm, 10 part per million oil can be removed from the DF unit. And basically API or a TPI is usually mount to take care about larger molecules up to 250 ppm parts per million. So from ranging from 2% oil up to 250 ppm. So 2%, 1% means 10,000 ppm. So 20,000 ppm to 250 ppm oil removal is happening on the pre-deoiler and TPI unit, and depth further reduced to 10 ppm. So when it is below 10 ppm, you cannot visualize through naked eyes. Sometime on a surface in presence of sunlight, you will see some coloration difference. So this is what the purity you can achieve at the end of pre-treatment area or oil treatment area. And then once it is achieved, that effluent or water stored into equalization tank, and from equalization tank, it is fed to the biotower. And biotower is nothing but a trickling filter. So there are some plastic media or a 8 dp media filled up in a tower. So from centrally you pump the water up to top to achieve some, to kill the gravity, and then you spray over the plastic media. So because of this tilting nature, it has a very good retention time from top to bottom. So because of this slow moving water, bacteria development will take place. And how bacteria will develop? Because we are adding some bionutrients over here, like urea or urea based some food for the bacteria. So whatever in organic impurities presence in the water, that organic impurities have a bacteria, and you are giving some food, so bacteria will propagate it. So propagated bacteria will inject into the biotower. Because of air contact, a lot of air contact, bacteria will grow, and its population started. And once it is grow in a sufficient amount, then via biotower second compartment, it will be pumped back to the aeration tank. Again, aeration tank also you have some fans to add the air, or sometime diffuse air bubbling effect via with the help of air fans. So basically we are adding some air, we are adding some oxygen, so that here also bacteria initially will populate, and this populated bacteria will not get any food to survive, because bionutrients we are adding very limited. So what will happen? Then bacteria will start eating organic impurity from the water, and this is how water become clearer one. But it will have a dead biomass and all this thing. So that's why this water we have to send back to the clarifier. So clarifier is a centrifugal action, low moving Raker arm. At the bottom, it will centrifuge the sludge, and on the top overflow portion, you will get the clearer water. And here you will get less than 5 ppm impurities water over here, and that water further stored into a clarified water tank and then sent to the dual media filter. Why it is dual media? Because there are two media, sand and anthracite. Anthracite helps to channelize the water and avoid channeling inside the sand bed. So this dual media filter and set of a carbon filter. So basically activated carbon filter, as you know, in our domestic RO also you will find many a time activated filter. Activated filter absorb the impurities, also some fouling smell is taken care by the activated carbon molecules. So this is how when water reach to the treated water tank, it is as good as to feed into the RO unit, to other process unit, for a cooling tower makeup and many more industrial application. And finally, we also add some chlorine, and chlorine is added to make the water disinfected, because that bacteria, any residual viral microbial part should not carry over in a subsequent unit. And that's why final killing of bacteria happens if something is left out by injecting 0.3 to 0.5 ppm of chlorine. So this is how entire wastewater treatment unit function. Any typical question, because this is a little bit complicated process. So before we move, I would definitely like to take one or two questions if anybody has. Okay, not a problem. Let's move ahead, and I would like to show you a Google image of a real wastewater treatment plant, where you can see all this unit, whatever we seen as a graphical version. So this is nothing but an inlet collection sump. This is a this API and DF unit, and then clarifier. This is a biotower. This is the aeration tank. Right, there are two aerators, big aerators. Then subsequently also you will have a two clarifier. One is a sludge thickener and another is a water clarifier. And then this water is pumped back to the filters. So here you can see dual media filters and activated carbon, a pair of filters. And once filtration is done, you have some small storage, then you can pump into elsewhere wherever you need to take this clean water. So and typically this is by nature we can say package unit, but this is a miniature plant or a plant within the plant. And this typical dimension is 50-meter long and some 28-meter width. So it's a large package unit, I would say. And when vendor has to supply, he need to basically supply all this piece of equipment, and then residual work as a construction we need to execute at the site. It has a even small electrical substation also to feed the power to the various drives, various pumps and fans. Okay, so next unit is spent caustic treatment. So word itself tells spent means utilize. So once caustic is utilized in the refining process, typically in refining process, gasoline Marox, Caro Marox. So basically those are the treaters which removes impurities from the diesel, from the petrol, from the naphtha, and all this impurity is absorbed in form of caustic solution. So when this caustic solution is absorbed with all these impurities, so it has a some pollutant like a phenol or mercaptan, and which is very pungent in smell and very dangerous, and we cannot demolish it as it is, and we need to treat it. So spent caustic treatment unit is basically either a low pressure, low temperature oxidation process or sometime high pressure, high temperature oxidation process. Worldwide, Zimpro or a US filter, they were pioneer in offering high temperature, high pressure water oxidation process. Some years back, Linde has invented low pressure, low temperature wet oxidation process, because the moment you lower down pressure and temperature, we all know as a mechanical engineer, it will require a low energy, because it works on air and feed base. So air comes from the compressor, so your compressor power will be drastically reduced. So what is the process? So spent caustic received from the refinery, it pumps into a header where compressor is also injected, and you will find some static mixer to mix the air and caustic. So after mixing in few minutes, reaction is a exothermic reaction. So automatic reaction will start in reactor, and heat start liberating from the top of the reactor. So that heat is utilized to initially heat or to make as an economizer kind of exchanger. So this exchanger is warm up the solution of air and caustic to 10 to 15 degrees, and then further heat is given through the electrical heater or sometime hot oil heater, or we can say is a trim heater. So primary heater and secondary heater. So after secondary heater, because to initiate the exothermic reaction, you need to elevate some temperature, and then that process will be automatic. So to give the temperature up to 100 to 120 degrees C, this two exchanger is helpful, and this is how a subsequent process is happening. And second thing, once this gaseous product or a purified caustic is also coming along with the gas, it is accumulated or with help of a cooler or a cooling down, you will converting into the liquid. You have a pressure regulating valve, so only liquid will be goes to the separator, and whatever gaseous some component is escaping, you can release as off gas into the flare, and whatever in liquid form, we can now send this utilize for a treated spent caustic into the wastewater treatment plant for the further treatment, because ultimately it is a caustic, it is alkaline. So at ETP, by adding acid dosing, it will be neutralized and it will be mixed along with the other water pollutant or other water effluent coming from the refinery. So this is how a water oxidation process works. So sometime back or as a pilot, Linde built up a 10 meter cube per hour spent caustic plant for IOCL Baroda, and that unit is in operation since last more than 17 years. Okay, now I will show only some images of similar some package units like DM plant, ion exchange based DM plant, how it looks like. So as word suggests, demineralize. So basically we have to remove the minerals from the water, which is not in suspension form, which is in a soluble form. So all the cations and anions is removed via resin units. So resin is a polystyrene small beads or a structure which helps to remove the cation and anion. This is ion exchange based unit, typically looks like many vessels and a lot of valves jargon. So this is how typical DM plant looks like. And nowadays, a modern trend is membrane based technology is also available, which absorb target cations and target anions. So this is how a membrane based technology is also working. And in Europe, typically where temperature is quite low and you cannot use the plastic piping and plastic membrane cell because of ambient temperature is below zero. So there you will find containerized plants. So everything they fit into the 40 feet container, sometimes 20 feet containers, and we have to only connect some piping from external along with the insulation. So this is what different variant available for the demineralization unit. And then it comes to air separation plant. So Linde is very much in this business where with the help of cryogenic column, they separate out air and nitrogen, and then they store differently oxygen and nitrogen in separate tank. And subsequently they have atmospheric vaporizers, very, very big vaporizers, which utilize atmospheric air because this liquid is stored at very cryogenic temperature, minus 92 for nitrogen and minus 186 for oxygen. At that temperature, it will be in liquid form. So, and in atmosphere, you have a easily available 25 to 35 degrees C air is available. So you have to simply liberate from the tank to the vaporizer, and it will be converted into the gaseous. And then gaseous nitrogen is supplied to the utility points, various utility points in the refinery and petrochemical plant. Instrument air dryer, very simple one. It's a adsorption process. Uh, Two vessels filled with adsorbent or activated alumina silica gel. So those are the very widely used as a absorbent. And one unit is in operation and other is always in regeneration. And for regeneration, sometime compressed air is used for the high temperature compressor is used for the regeneration, and sometimes electrical heater is used for the regeneration. So both the unit one by one at any given point of time, one unit will be always in operation. So this is how instrument air is used in the industries, and typically the end objective is to minimize the dew point. You all are professor and my fellow colleagues, so I would like to understand more about on what is the dew point. What do you mean by dew point, and what is the pressure dew point, and what is the atmospheric dew point? So can anyone throw some light on dew point?
Sir, dew point is the temperature at which moisture contained in the air starts to condense. So it is some specific temperature below
Perfect.
which moisture always starts to convert or to condense.
Correct. Thank you, Dr. Jani. So basically, yes, you rightly said. Typically in industrial dryer, because you are operating at certain pressure, so you have a two-way of measurement. Let's say if this is my outlet line, or I would say dry air outlet. In that case, how to measure it? So we have a two-way. Either we can measure at particular pressure, because this is operating roughly around 7 bar pressure. So once we measure at that pressure, then it becomes a pressure dew point. And if you have a sample point and you are bleeding the air into atmosphere and measuring at atmospheric level, then that is called atmospheric dew point. And as you know, there is a good relationship between atmospheric dew point and pressure dew point. Yeah, so sometime when customers specify, we need to ask back, do you mean pressure dew point or atmospheric dew point? Because typically -40 degree C is the expected dew point at atmospheric condition. This is a by and large used in various industries. But if you look at the scale or a relationship graph, you will see -20 is a pressure dew point. So both are same. Both has the same air quality, but measurement has a differences. So dew point varies depending on the pressure. So this is the key thing when we specify for the dryer, or usually when we get such requests, we always clarify on the dew point, which condition you need. Chemical dosing unit, you already seen this image. Reverse osmosis unit. So another way of doing demineralization nowadays is reverse osmosis. So reverse osmosis is widely catering a range of total dissolved solids ranging from 10,000, even more than 10,000 in seawater application, in brackish water application, and in a typical industrial waste where you have some 1,000 or 1,500 TDS, or usually river water ranging from 500 to 1,200 TDS. So all kind of application you can produce DM water straight away by putting a number of stages on a product staging or a reject staging. We can achieve this via reverse osmosis plant. So let's look at, so far we have, seen a lot of package unit at a glance, how it look like, what is the purpose in industries. Now I would like to throw some light on a detailed view of two package units. Because of time constraint, I will be touching these two units in much more depth. One is a cooling tower and another is a thermal desalination. So let's go to first part, that is the cooling tower in detail. So before we start cooling tower, any general idea, or it's a very widely known terminology in mechanical engineering. Also we have, even at my time also, there was a subject called power plant engineering, and we used to see a lot of variety of cooling towers. So before we start, anybody would like to tell about what are the different type you might have seen or came across or heard or read uh, on the type of cooling towers?
So it may be natural cooling tower or artificial cooling tower. In natural, we use the atmospheric air, and in artificial cooling, we use pump or something else to blow the air to cool down the water.
Perfect. Thank you, Jay.
We can say updraft cooling tower and downdraft cooling tower.
Yes, true. Based on the nature of interaction of air and water, yes. Fine. So before we come to the types of cooling tower, let us understand what is cooling tower and why it is needed, right? As you know, it is the biggest heat transfer device in an industry. It's a very large footprint. It caters, it works like a huge heat exchanger, and very high amount of flow is taken care at the cooling tower. Process heat is basically rejected into the circulating water through the various heat exchanger, and that comes back to the cooling tower. So heat from the circulating water is taken away through the atmospheric air. So at cooling tower end, all the heat is being liberated in the form of atmospheric air, and this is how cooling is taking place. So water is cooled back to the defined or a definite temperature based on the wet bulb temperature condition, because we cannot operate the way we wish. It depends on wet bulb temperature. During evaporation, because majority of portion or heat transfer is taking place because due to evaporation, so some amount of water also get carried away into the atmosphere due to wind or because of, as somebody said, mechanical cooling tower. So it has a fan. So that fan also carry away some of the air plus water droplets. In any evaporation process, what happens? So all the pure or a pure vapor always liberate. You will find all the salt or a residual part always remain inside the system, and only whatever vapor is getting evaporated, that is always pure. So this is how over a period of time you can see that total dissolved solid concentration is start accumulating in the cooling water. And that's why we need to blow down it and remove some impurities so that whatever is our desired TDS, we can always able to maintain that TDS in the circulating water. And why we need to maintain those total dissolved solid? Because high amount of solid can deposit on the low velocity area of the various heat exchanger, and as day by day when accumulation start, it affects the heat transfer, and then over a period of time it will reflect into the intended processes also. So that is why it is not only a duty of a process engineer who are running the plant to maintain heat exchanger up to the date, but it is a rather, I would say, a more responsibility lies with the person who is operating cooling tower and assuring a quality cooling water in the circulating water. And this is how you can really enhance the life cycle of your heat exchangers and all the connected equipment to the cooling tower. So cooling tower, as you know, it performs very good in dry and less humid climate. Basically in winter you will find less humidity and dry air. In summer you will find some humidity because just close to the monsoon region, and in monsoon it performs little bit poor because you will find a lot of humidity, and because of the dryness is not available, so air is already saturated and it has to perform a range of temperature reduction, and which is difficult sometimes. It's a simple schematic of cooling tower, how it looks like. So basically cooling tower cells, sometimes it may be a pair of two, and in multiple rows, sometimes 4, 6, 8, 10 like that. And sometimes if it is a row of one cell, then 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. And usually this is a picture of a induced draft cooling tower. So you can always see a fan at top to liberate the heat, and on the side louvers you will find air is coming inside to the cell, and you have at the bottom whatever water you are throwing at the top deck gets cool and convert into the temp or a low temperature water or cold water temperature. So you have a sump, and then you can again pump back into the process. So basically process unit is a set of some exchangers, and after taking the heat again water becomes warm, so warm water comes back, and again we are fetching in the sump, not on the sump, but basically it will be on the top deck, and from top deck it comes to the sump. And during this process some of the stream, or I would say 2 to 2.5% water stream, we are just extracting out and putting back into the side stream filter. We are using a small stream, that is why it is called side stream. We are not putting entire stream in the filter, and which is not required at all, because how SSF works. It works on a principle. Let's say you have a glass of water, glass of dirty water, and out of that dirty water glass, so the moment, excuse me, are you able to see my presentation?
Yeah, sir. Your voice
Okay.
is good and it is readily available.
Okay, fine. Because I seen one picture, so I was little bit afraid whether it is still in presentation mode or not. Thank you. So basically, a glass of water, dirty water. Let's say you are removing some quantity of water. I would say 100 ml water is there in a transparent glass which has some dirt. So you remove some 20% water or 20 ml, you throw it and put some fresh water inside. Then again, after some time, you take out 20% water and put some new water. So what I mean to say, over a period of time or after some cycle, you will see water inside the glass will become good. I would say not pure, but it will be better than earlier. Because in circulating cooling water, our objective is not to, kill or minimize TDS level to 0, 1 or 5 or no. Because water need to be a certain extent, it has phosphate, sulfate, all these impurities should be available. Otherwise, if you drastically remove all the dissolved solids, then water become corrosive. It is also not good for the heat exchanger life. So, I mean, it is a general apprehension of as a layman before we understand cooling tower, that better the water in terms of a very low TDS water, it is a better water. No, it has to have some minimum TDS who can, which can impart some hardness, yeah, and it can protect, it can build some protective layer on the heat transfer area, and which is essential. If that layer is not there, then probably because of corrosive nature of the water, it can puncture the tubes. So which is also not desired. So one terminology called LSI index, Lagrangian Stability Index. So that is one measure. That measure gives a corrosiveness of water, whether water is a corrosive or not. Another thing is a biofouling monitor. So again, just like a side stream filter, you can take out one small stream. You can see what is the amount of bacteria present. So that gives some biofouling activity is happening. So you need to inject chlorine. So it gives an indication how much or when we need to do some soak dosing and what is the amount of regular chemical dosing we needed to maintain everything. I mean, to maintain water TDS well within the limit, chloride level within the limit, and other impurities also in limit. So in subsequent slide, we will see various parameter of the water and how it impact on the cooling tower operation. Before that, let me tell you, since to maintain all these things, we need to throw out some water as a blowdown. And whatever losses is happening, either from blowdown or from evaporation or from side wind losses or wind edges losses, we have to make it up by adding fresh water. So basically, we are adding fresh water from here, and here we are doing some purification. So these two together will able to maintain, and third is the blowdown. These three ratio of control between side stream filtration, makeup and blowdown ensure good quality of circulating water. So basically as a cooling tower engineer or an operator, they need to maintain circulating water quality intact. Okay, so what are the types of cooling tower as we initially asked? So someone rightly said, so based on even structure or a construction also, you can see wooden cooling tower, reinforced concrete cooling towers, fiber reinforced plastic cooling towers. And based on the water flow type, like open cycle, just you use the water, cool it down and throw it out. Closed cycle, we are recycling the same water again and again. Also, there is an indirect cooling. So indirect cooling is nothing but cooling tower is giving the water to only one intended heat exchanger. Here is a plate heat exchanger. So that plate heat exchanger is exchanging the heat in the secondary circuit. So this is why it is called indirect cooling. So this cooling tower is just installed to take care of series of plate heat exchanger. And why this kind of phenomena is being done? Because let's say if you are not doing this and you are connecting both the circuit together with the same pump, then what will happen? This cooling water would be faced by all the heat exchanger connected in the industries. And depending on the water availability, depending on the impurities presence in the cooling tower, you will have to design all your heat exchanger, and sometimes it is a very costly phenomena because it will call for you to go for carbon steel to alloy steel or sometimes stainless steel, and this is how a capital cost on account of heat exchanger increases. So rather than that, if you put a one exchanger with a superior metallurgy, and you can just pass on the heat in the secondary circuit, and there in secondary circuit you have your intended water. Yeah, you can even have a inferior water as compared to this circuit, and that water basically, in terms of not corrosivity, because you are taking care the secondary circuit by adding chemical injection and all these things, but primarily you have some constraint on a makeup water, because makeup depend on where this industry is situated. Sometime on the river bank, so you are depending on that particular river water. Sometime on the seashore, so you are depending on largely desalinated water or a seawater application. So that's why. And typically, I have seen in Reliance Industries, it is on a coastal area, so they are using sea cooling tower. So this complete cooling tower is designed to take care of very high TDS, 20,000 TDS. So when you send 20,000 TDS, all exchanger cannot take care. But they have a heat exchanger with incolloy and monel metal or a noble metal which can easily sustain with the seawater. Sometimes duplex steel is also widely used. So this is how you can have a small amount of heat exchanger with a superior metallurgy and large or majority exchanger with the carbon steel. So you will get a very good cost advantage by doing this kind of indirect cooling. Based on air water contact, yes, somebody, Jay Patel rightly said, on a cross flow or a counter flow, depending on how air is moving inside the cooling tower. And based on the fan location, yes, that was also touched upon, like a natural draft where no fan is needed, no mechanical energy is needed, and because of a parabolic nature of the cell or a tower, that creates the draft from bottom to top, and that takes away heat from the circulating cooling tower inside the tower. Induced force and balance, as you know, by virtue of fan placement, it is known like fan mounted at top. That's the induced one. Sometimes forced out. Nowadays, it is an obsolete one, but still, I have seen one installation in AEC Ahmedabad where a forced draft cooling tower is also there. Because what happens, over a period of time, when company is continuously expanding their facilities, and effectively by virtue you don't have sufficient space available around the cooling tower, which which become hurdle for a cooling tower operation. So there sometime they install a long duct, air duct, and they put fans somewhere at the distance, so fan will suck the air from the clearer area and push into the cooling tower, because surrounding to cooling tower, either it is surrounded by a big building after post expansion, or sometime a large plant or some stack or a huge structure is obstructing the air movement. So that particular area only forced draft is, otherwise nowadays induced draft is the economical one, is favoring also in terms of maintaining the cooling tower height and all the thing and power consumption point of view. And balance drive, very rarely in a revamp or a modification case where you have already induced draft fan and you are just putting few of the forced draft fan to facilitate some summer operation like that. Okay, so how cross flow cooling tower looks like? It's a very simple one. It is a 3-cell cooling tower, wooden and FRP cooling tower is there. These are the side louvers where air entry is there, and here this is in the construction. So here you will say cooling tower sump will be there. This is a basin which is bottom of the cell. So sometime you will find the partition between the cell, so that during maintenance, when you want to completely shut down one cell area, You can stop the spraying of the water, you can stop the fan, you can have a partition, so you can carry out basin cleaning like that. So how it works? So look at the principle, working principle. So field material is there on the both the side, and center you will find the hollow portion. It is a completely hollow. So dry air from the lures will go inside, and because of virtue of fan is moving, so air will try to go upward, and on the both side you will find water. Water is being spread over the cooling tower fills material, and this is how tangentially air and water heat exchange is takes place. So you can see this blue arrow is a water and black is air, so you can say perpendicular movement is happening, and this is how cooling is taking place. Now let us understand what is happening on counterflow. This is a counterflow cooling tower, and here you can see dry air movement and water both are moving parallel in a cross direction. And second thing you can see here, it is not a gravity flow, it is a pressure jetting. So you will find more atomization which help to improve the heat exchange, and this is why you will be able to maintain the height quite close, 1 to 1.5 meter. For the same heat duty you can have a less height cooling tower, and which is ultimately saving of structure and capital cost. Second thing you can see, it is not completely from bottom to top open. Its top portion it has a field material over here, whereas on a cross flow it was on side, right? So here in the closer portion you will find field material, and this open lures on all four side that is being used for air movement. And return water is, see, it can be, it is fed up to the top because you want to utilize this line pressure to create the flow, to create the pressurization effect. And this is why this is a more effective counterflow cooling tower are more effective as compared to cross flow, and also you will find a less footprint. So this is the main advantage of this cooling tower. Since here there is a mature audience, and you might be as a lecturer, professor teaching mechanical engineering or a power plant subject, so you may have a more peripheral topic surrounding to cross flow and counter flow. So if anyone would like to share any additional topic, please feel free to share. Okay. Yes.
Hello.
I wanted to share one thing, sir.
Yeah, please
I
go ahead.
wanted to share the thing that the performance of the cooling tower, as you mentioned earlier, greatly depend on the wet bulb temperature of living air. So that where ambient humidity is low, at that time cooling tower will give you the better performance. But when ambient humidity increases, performance of the cooling tower will go drastically reduces in linearly with the reduction in the humidity. So that is one of the reasons how the natural draft cooling towers get suffer from the environmental impacts.
Correct. Absolutely correct. And Dr. Jani, most of the time, let us look at even this cooling tower, mechanical cooling tower. You can say twin cell. So there are 8 cells in this cooling tower. And usually when we design mechanical fans, we always keep both margin, hydraulic margin that is on the flow, and also equivalent to one cell margin, heat load margin in terms of humidity variation, in terms of little bit variation on wet bulb temperature throughout the season. So what we will do usually by operating, I would say 7 number of fan, we would be able to achieve the delta T range. And this is how this 8th fan as a spare would be helping us whenever there is a disturbance in humidity, or whenever in monsoon we need to uh, maintain the temperature, and because of humidity you are not able to do that. So sometime velocity plays an important role, because it will not drastically increase, but some incremental of 1 to 1.5 degree by running a fan after 2 hours. When you run additional fan, you will see some improvement on the cold water temperature. So this is how usually it maintains. And in winter, many a time even we have to stop 2, 3, and sometime even 4 fans also, depending on the weather condition. So usually nowadays fan operation is also coming based on the temperature limit. So you will find a temperature transmitter on the cooling water or a cold water discharge line. It will be always monitoring that temperature. Let's say if my cooling tower is intended to give 32 degrees C to the plant, so that transmitter will be always monitored, and it will give a graphical representation also in which season what phenomena is happening. So depending on that, we many a time give automatic fan operation. That is one part, on and off operation. Second part is to take care about the seasonal variation. Nowadays we have a variable pitch fan. So that means fan blade angle can change depending on the requirement. So amount of draft creation can be also uh, modulated. But it is a costly. I mean, any additional thing we are putting, it's a costly one. So we always look at topological data of last 50 years of that geography before we offering any customized solution to the vendor, because that is most important, how weather is behaving in that area. And we should not unnecessarily invest much, as well as we cannot compromise on the temperature pattern. So this is what or where we need to strike the balance between capital cost versus temperature requirement. And sometimes, if you look at down the line in a process is heat exchanger, there are many heat exchanger, and every heat exchanger have a hidden margin of 5 to 10% on hydraulic part as well as on the temperature variation part. So what I mean to say, instead of 32, if it is sometime increased to 32.5, I am sure those exchangers are not going to impact. So before even deciding on that range and flow, we always consult with the process engineers who are associated with the core processes and who has designed the heat exchanger, what is the margin available. And that's the reason usually we do not build over margin or a double margin in the cooling tower. If they have considered sufficient margin on hydraulic and temperature part, then we usually do not offer variable pitch fan or a VFD, variable frequency drive to the motors, and we simply offer an ordinary fan where on and off operation suffice the purpose. Thank you. So I think by now we reach up to 1 hour almost. So would like to break for 5 minutes with your due permission, and then let's meet again um, maybe by 11:15. Is it fine?
Okay, thank you, sir. Dear participant, as per the request of the speaker, we will have to have the break as per the sun's instruction, and we stay in the meeting. Just after a few minutes, we may be as per sun's
Yes.
instruction.
Just mute
We'll
it
get
and be
back.
here. Correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.